Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I always give few seconds just in case. Looks like we are live. Thank you so much for being with us here today. To all the moderators in the chat, thank you so much. To everyone who's watching, I just want to tell you guys that I was scrolling through the live chat and I see you are from so many different countries, and I'm so grateful to have audience like yourself, especially when I am joined by Mr. Scott Ritter. A lot of you are here, and we really appreciate your time, your energy, your support. Scott Ritter is back in the house. No introduction needed. But Scott, you know what I was thinking? What is the best way to introduce you now? Because there were so many different introductions. What describes you the best at this point with this crazy schedule with interviews?
Old man.
No. I mean, military expert and former UN inspector.
I don't like the term expert because that sounds a little too self-important. I am what I am. I'm a former Marine Corps intelligence officer and a former United Nations weapons inspector in Iraq, and somebody who specializes in arms control and Middle East and Russian affairs.
Thank you. And to find all the links to Scott, you just scroll down under our live stream and there is Scott Ritter Extra. So make sure to subscribe there and it takes you to all the links, all the books, etc. All the links to me and other platforms and support my work as well, you find down below this live stream. Today I have 4 questions. I was hesitating, which I should start with question number 1 or 2. And in the last minute, I've decided to start with the question 2. Which is, let's start with Ukraine. So on 14th of April, 2023, I think it was, Vladimir Putin signed a law that makes electronic call-up notices equivalent to the other ones served in person and introduces a registered person liable for military service and bans evades from crossing the border. Call-up notices will be issued electronically in Russia as of November 2024, and travel abroad will be restricted for those who are liable for military service. So 2024. I would like to ask you, Scott, why November? It looks like from November, those people who are liable for military service will not be able to travel abroad. Why month of November?
I'd have to go back and check. There's 2 conscription periods for Russia. They do conscription twice a year. Generally, I think the last time they conscripted 150,000 for 2-year service, and I think the time before it was around 136. And maybe November is the call-up period. So basically, you publish the law. The law has to be published for a certain amount of time so that people can be cognizant of the law, make adjustments accordingly. You don't want to spring a law upon people. But my guess is that that this would be the case come the next conscription period. But I'd have to double check to make sure. But that seems to be the logic. That would be a logical answer. But I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And now I have a question for you. That if we will not ever again talk about Ukraine, which I don't think it will be the case, unfortunately, but this would be the question that I will ask you. It's a long intro, but bear with me, everyone. I translated this from Polish into English to make sure no mistakes. So it is said that victors write history, but history is also interpreted depending on the country in which it is taught in such a way that it serves the power of a given country in manipulating society. However, let's try to imagine situations where we hope that one day only true history will be served to everyone in the world. Let's say in 1,000 years from now, when someone reaches for a history book and opens a chapter on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, what will they read? What will be a short analysis of this conflict and what effect did conflict had on the world? That's my question.
You're making my brain work too early in the morning. Well, okay, let's play along with this. We're talking about in the future, so that things can be put into perspective. Um, and to put something in perspective, that means that you not only take a look at the consequences of what has happened, but you also look very much so into what led up to this conflict. And I think what history is going to show is that this conflict, which many say began when Vladimir Putin ordered the Russian military into Ukraine in February of 2022. Others will say it began when Vladimir Putin ordered the little green men into Crimea in March and April of 2014. Some will say it began in February 2014 when the United States precipitated a coup in Kiev, the Maidan, or some people call it the Revolution of Dignity. But I don't think it'll be called the Revolution of Dignity because victors write the history, and that term, while it should be put in there, I mean, again, I'm somebody who believes that history should be told from all perspectives, and that term should be put in there so people understand how one party sought to manipulate and twist words to justify their actions. But it wasn't a revolution of dignity because no people who are dignified would allow an outside power to come in and manipulate them the way they did, or allow a political minority to use violence to seize control of the political processes, which again happened with the right sector, Sloboda, and the other Banderist supporting Ukrainian political elements. Other people would say that it began in 2004, 2005 with the Color Revolution. Again, another American European Union backed effort to install Ukrainian nationalism at the expense of ethnic Russian elements in the Ukrainian government. We're going to keep going backwards. You see what's happening here is that this war didn't just happen in a vacuum. We keep going backwards to what happened in 1990, 1991 as the Soviet Union began to collapse. What was the American vision? How did we view Ukraine? How was the CIA, which we know was involved in 2014, which we know is involved today, what was the CIA's role in shaping Ukrainian nationalism? We would suddenly have to realize that the CIA, which stopped officially funding Banderist nationalist organizations in 1990, when did they begin funding them? Back in 1948. Why 48? What was going on with the CIA or OSS actually at the time, and these nationalists? We'd have to dig deeper and find out the roots of the American intelligence agency's involvement. We realized that they were collaborating with Nazi intelligence organizations that used Ukrainian nationalists as proxies. We'd have to delve into the relationship between the Banderist movement and Nazi Germany. We'd have to get into the roots of Banderism in Poland in the 1930s. And we can just keep going backwards and backwards to see how people have been using Ukrainian nationalism for their own ends. Vladimir Putin spoke about this several times. I mean, famously with Tucker Carlson in his televised interview last February, where over 1 billion people watched and rolled their eyes in boredom as Putin talked about, Ukrainian nationalism being the creation of Austro-Hungarian politicians and generals during World War I to help create unrest in territories of Galicia that are disputed between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Russian Empire. And we could just even keep going back further and further and see how, this thing called Ukrainian nationalism, it's actually not real Ukrainian nationalism. It's a Galatian nationalism. It has nothing to do with Slavs per se, and everything to do with sort of Greco-Catholic elements that were ethnically and religiously and culturally distinct from what many people call Kievan Rus, the sort of the birthplace of modern day Russia. And how these nationalists were used, manipulated, turned into this white supremacist group. And I say white supremacist because everybody was white back then, so it was just supremacist. This notion of a superior race, separate from everybody else, and how this was turned into a cult of violence. When people take a look at what this Western Ukrainian nationalism, what it stood for, and how it dehumanized everybody else that wasn't Western Ukrainian nationalism, I think you will see there's a psychosis, a sickness that's imbued in this. You have to be psychotic if you stop viewing other people as less than human, and yet this is what the Western Ukrainian nationalists did. You're a Pole. Volyn means something to you. You know what happened in Volyn. You know what happened when the Western Ukrainians rose up and slaughtered over 110,000 Poles. And this isn't just slaughter. I mean, we talk about killing. There's an artist that has painted pictures that are derived from the firsthand testimony of what the Western Ukrainians did to the Poles. And I would say that these paintings are not meant for the light of hearted. But when you take a newborn infant who's alive and you physically break their hands, break their bones, break their body in front of the mother who you've just disemboweled, but she's left alive, but you've staked her out, and you hack to death people while they're alive, so body parts are lying there. Meanwhile, to hide the sounds from other villagers, you have a female choir standing outside singing songs to disguise the screams of what's happening inside the building. And this isn't an isolated event. It happened over and over and over again. 110,000 murdered people. This is a sickness that has infected a certain people, and the I guess the fanaticism of these people has been used by others over history. And that's what we're going to see here, is how outside parties have used this psychotic fanaticism that is Western Ukrainian nationalism, not to further the quote unquote legitimate national aspirations of the Ukrainian people, because nobody has ever respected the legitimate national aspirations of the Western Ukrainian people. No one. There's never been an independent Ukraine. I mean, today we have this entity called Ukraine, but it's not really what the Western Ukrainian nationalists want, because a huge chunk of this Ukraine are Russians. Eastern Ukraine, just sort of artificially appended on by Lenin and Stalin and Khrushchev to create something that could be economically viable as an entity that was never meant to be independent. That's what people need to understand, that when the Soviet Union started expanding Ukraine and creating this thing called Ukraine, it was never meant to be independent. It was always supposed to be part of a larger union of Soviet socialist republics, never intended to be an independent entity. And yet, when the collapse of the Soviet Union came, the United States sought to use Ukrainian nationalism to undermine Russia, to help break up Russia, to help weaken Russia, to help ensure that Russia could never again rise from the ashes of the Soviet Union to threaten the West, because Russia is still a huge place with tremendous resources, mineral resources, self-sufficient. The West doesn't like self-sufficient nations because it's hard to bring them under your economic control when they can live without you. So we needed to break it up. And we used Ukrainian nationalism to achieve this. The Ukrainian nationalism isn't, again, legitimate national aspirations. It is the nationalism as defined by Stepan Bandera. The Banderists struggled against Soviet and Polish rule and Belarusian rule after World War II. A lot of people don't understand the level of fighting that took place, the violence that took place as these Ukrainian nationalists who used to be allies of Nazi Germany. In fact, their ranks were full of a lot of Nazis. A lot of people, it's interesting when you dig into the history. There was a history that showed the group, the Galen Group, which was an intelligence organization during World War II that operated on the Eastern Front exclusively. They had elements within this organization group, the Eastern Forces, that would do operations inside the Soviet Union, inside the rear areas. So they would be flown in or parachute in, and then they would operate. One of the, I think October, November of 1944, after the Russians had kicked the Germans out of a lot of what is present-day Ukraine, the Germans sent a team in, around 70 guys, and they landed, and their job was to go out and make contact with the Banderists. And they did. They made contact. They reestablished contact. They gave them orders, what they're supposed to do, etc. But when you read the reports, these Germans are talking about how the Banderist ranks, there was about 700 of the left behind. You see, when you have millions of Germans running from the Soviets for their lives, many of them go to the ground, go to the woods, and they found common cause with these Banderists. So there was about 700 German soldiers who weren't able to make it out to Germany, staying behind fighting with these Banderist organizations. So the Nazi link is a lot closer than people think. They were still continued to be directed by the Nazis up until the very end. And when the Galen organization was absorbed by the U.S. Army forces in Europe, later by the OSS, later by the CIA, they still maintained this connectivity. And then the CIA would, take Ukrainians from the displaced people camps in Germany, train them up and parachute them into Ukraine. This is in the 1940s, 1950s to make, to link up with these remaining combat forces. I think the last of them were finally rooted out. I mean, there's some talk about up until 1960 killing individual guys in buildings, but the last organized resistance was around 1954, 1955 when they were killed. But then the CIA, instead of saying, oops, it's done, the CIA continued to fund this Banderist group in diaspora and have that money and the organizing principles put back into the Soviet Union. When Khrushchev came to power, he started this de-Stalinization thing. He gave his secret speech where he criticized Stalin, and he released people from the Gulag. He shut down the giant Gulag system and got rid of all the political prisoners. And most of the Banderists, over 200,000 who had been arrested, were released and brought back to Ukraine. And then they began the process of re-insinuating themselves into Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian government, all backed by the CIA. People don't understand that the Banderists who came in are being backed by the CIA, backed by the Banderist organizations in diaspora. They make common cause, and they were in the process of re-insinuating themselves back into Soviet society. So much so that in 1990, when the Soviet Union goes away, the CIA went, well, look, we already won. We don't need to continue funding these people covertly. We won. They're in power. We're in power. Ukraine has always been a CIA exercise, a CIA-controlled, experiment of destabilizing first Soviet authority and now Russian authority. This is what history will show when the fighting is done and the smoke is cleared and the bodies have been buried and we gain access, the world gains access to the Ukrainian archives, and the Russians finally release their archives. What we're going to see is that this was a war that was decades in the making, that this is one of the decisive conflicts of modern history. This is a war where Russia has said to the CIA-driven experiment, no more. You shall not pass. This is it. We are done. We have drawn a red line. You're not going to get away with this. We're finishing this once and for all. This is the end of the CIA's anti-Russian experiment. It's over now. It has failed. And that experiment includes two other entities, NATO and the European Union. This is all part of the grand scheme done by the United States to control Europe for the purpose of bringing down Russia while retaining control of Europe. And it is collapsing as well. this Ukrainian conflict will go down in history as one of the more decisive defeats of the so-called collective West. It is the beginning of the end. You know, when people took a look at the collapse of the Roman Empire, for instance, a lot of people point to the battle of, and it's skipping my mind, I just had it on my tongue, but it's between Attila the Hun and the Roman Empire. And the point is that, you know, that took place almost, I mean, centuries before the Roman Empire finally collapsed. But it was Chalons, maybe the battle is, I don't know. But the Roman Empire suffered a major defeat at the hands of the barbarians, and it was signaled as collapse. But the collapse of the Roman Empire began well before that. This Ukrainian war, I believe historians are going to put a pin on the map and say this is the war that signaled the end of the American empire. That from this point on, what we're going to see is collapse. We're going to see decline. We're going to see retreat. And everything that's going to happen from this point on is all linked to this. The rise of BRICS as an economic and political counterweight to the U.S. controlled G7, G20. BRICS was accelerated by this conflict. This conflict compelled not only Russia and China to come together to breathe relevance into BRICS, because BRICS predated this by a decade. But up until then, nobody really took it seriously. It wasn't a serious organization. What could it do? The G7 was so much more influential. But now Russia and China came together and said, we have to create a counter to the rules-based liberal order, or international order that the United States is promoting. The sanctioning of Russia liberated Russia, actually, in many ways. It broke the back of the oligarchs who had seized control of the Russian institution back in the 1990s and still had control of it. I mean, it's funny. Everybody talks about Vladimir Putin as this absolute dictator. I think the truth is he's not, never has been. Vladimir Putin inherited a fundamentally broken country. In order to keep that country alive, he had to allow a lot of things to happen that under normal circumstances, you would never allow to happen. The amount of corruption that had seeped into every aspect of Russian society. You can't come in and say it's all done. You can't come in and say it's all finished. What you have to do is say it stinks, but this stinks more. I'm going to solve this problem. I have to get pensions to my number one priority is getting pensions to the old people, is creating stability, which means I'm going to have to tolerate a lot of this garbage that's going on right now. And as you build institutions while you're tolerating garbage, the garbage infiltrates the institutions. I'm not saying Navalny was wrong. Navalny was right when he said that Russia was inherently corrupt. It was, but it's not Putin's fault. That's where he made the mistake. To sit there and say, this is Vladimir Putin's Russia. Vladimir Putin inherited Boris Yeltsin's Russia, and trying to fix it, you can't do it overnight. You have to work, and you're being attacked from all fronts. You have the Chechen war. You have to solve the problem in Chechnya. You have the expansion of NATO. You have a whole bunch of stuff happening, and which means that you have to maintain a semblance of domestic political order. You can't go around and have a revolution and expect the people to back you while you're being attacked from abroad. So it's a slow process. But when the West sanctioned Russia and then sanctioned the oligarchs, it was the greatest favor to Vladimir Putin you could ever do. He went, wait a minute, you just disenfranchised the oligarchs. Thank you. I've been waiting a long time to do that. They're gone. Now he could get hard. Now he turns to the pro-Western element of his economy. The West made it easy too, because Putin couldn't have done the divorce. That would have had 30% of the population, because never forget, Russia is a democracy, and 30% of the population would have flipped over to the opposition. He would have lost elections that he was only winning by 52, 53, 54%. He would have lost those elections. So he couldn't unplug, but the West unplugged for him. And he went, don't blame me, the West did it. And they came to him. And now the final thing, he just had an election during wartime. Again, the election that just happened this year could not have happened under the similar context without the war. What the war did And again, it's a war that was imposed on Putin. This isn't Putin's master plan. This is Putin being a great boxer, reacting, moving and jabbing, and they put this war on him. And he sits there and he says, wait a minute, because he wanted this war over. We know he wanted this war over. We know he did. That was the design of the conflict. The special military operation was supposed to be come in, intimidate Ukraine to the negotiating table, and have this war done within a month or two. We know because the Istanbul communique that was ready to be signed on 1 April would have achieved that. So Putin wasn't using this conflict for some master plan like NATO accuses him of. He has been forced to react to everything. Sustained conflict, 300,000 mobilization, transition to a military industrial economic base. All of this wasn't part of a master plan. It was imposed on him. This war could have been over a long time ago, but the West kept infusing money into Ukraine, keeping the war going, forcing Putin to make decisions. And finally, Putin went, wait a minute, look what's happened here. I had a Russia that when this war started, and a lot of people don't realize this, I would say the majority of the Russians, while not opposed to the war, didn't support the war. I say that because I've met many Russians who tell me when this thing first started, I wasn't on board. I thought this was needless. I didn't think we needed to go to war. I didn't think this was required. I didn't understand what was going on. Today, you don't hear any of that. Today, this war is an existential struggle for the survival of Russia in the face of a master plan being driven by the United States and the collective West. This is, Russia has to do this. The patriotism level has risen up, everything. And the beauty thing about war is when you're asking people to make the ultimate sacrifice. And it's not just, the Russians get this. It's not just about what's happening on the front lines. It's what's happening on the home front. If you go to the city of Magnitogorsk in Russia, big steel city, you'll see there is a statue of a Russian soldier and a Russian worker with us raising the sword above them. It's the home front statue. It's basically a thing that says that the Great Patriotic War, this is about the home front, the people that made victory possible, the people that took the steel from the ore from the ground, turned it into steel, forged it into sword, handed it to the soldier. You see the same sword in the hands of Mother Russia at Stalingrad. The motherland beckons. She is waving them forward, holding that sword. You see the sword in the hand of the soldier in Berlin. After they won, he has a sword. He's putting it down, holding the child. You see that same sword. You see that sword being turned into a plow at the United Nations. The circle is complete, but the Russian people know. The Russian people know the importance of the home front. And one thing about the home front, when the home front is mobilized to send the sons and the fathers and the uncles and the brothers to war, there is no tolerance for corruption, none whatsoever. Vladimir Putin went, thank you very much, West. I'm going to hold an election. And I'm going to get as many people to participate in this election as possible, not because of me, but because they're patriotic Russians. I'm going to make this election about Russia. And it did. 77% of the population went out and participated in this election. Last 2020 in the United States, the level of participation in the election had the greatest turnout ever. I mean, 77 million voted for Trump, 81 million voted for Biden, depending on who's counting. But my point is that was only 66% of Americans. And that's considered a good turnout. Russia got 77% to turn out, 88% of whom voted for Vladimir Putin. That's called a mandate. He's going to be sworn into office. I think the inauguration is on May 7th. And when he gets sworn in, there's already talk in Russia now of a purge. You see, Vladimir Putin knows that he's 71 years old. Again, Russians know their history. They know what happened at the end of the Soviet Union, where leaders held on till the very end. Brezhnev lost his mind. He was a babbling idiot by the time he finished. When Andropov took over, he was fatally ill. Even though he wanted to do better, age caught up to him and killed him with cancer. He was replaced by Chernenko, who was literally brain dead when they swore him in, but he was the establishment. It was only after Chernenko died that Gorbachev in his 50s became the next leader. But by that time, the system had collapsed so much that Gorbachev was unable to save it. And it led to the 1990s, Boris Yeltsin, who turned into an aged, drunken, ridiculous man by the time he was over. Vladimir Putin stepped in, a man in his 40s at the time he became president. Today he's 71. And, he knows, and the Russians know their history. Okay, he has 6 years, so he'll be 77. Now he's a young man still. I mean, he's active. He's physically active. He speaks very well, but he's not immortal. And come 2030 at the next election, if Russia's still looking to a 77-year-old man for their future, Russia's got problems, and Putin knows this. But he has to fix Russia. He can't allow Russia to continue to be that which he inherited from Boris Yeltsin. The remnants of that diseased regime have to be removed. And he's going to remove them. And the war enabled him to do this. So that's another thing about this war. It is transformational, not only geopolitically on a global scale, it's transformational for Russia. The Russia's that's going to emerge because of the political decisions that Vladimir Putin's going to make in the next 6 years could not have happened without this war. Putin's hands were tied. The level of corruption, the level of disease, the level of sickness that infected Russia was still there. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are like, Scott, you're so pro-Russian. So I'm not pro-Russian. I like Russia, but I'm realistic about Russia. I understand Russia. I make an effort to understand Russia. It's a nation seething in corruption. I wouldn't call it seething in corruption, but it's a nation that has certain inherent corruption to it. The system of government was inherited from Boris Yeltsin. And Vladimir Putin, in order to help Russia survive in these decades where everybody's been trying to destroy it, was not able to totally purge this corruption from the Russian enterprise. He's now going to do this. And he's going to create a new Russian state that's founded on principles of what defines Russian nationalism. And those principles were forged from this conflict. This conflict backfired as far as the West is concerned, because it weakened the West and it strengthened Russia. Russia now walks into BRICS, not the economic weakling that everybody thought. I mean, when BRICS was first formed, they're like, it's Russia, but what is Russia? They got no economy. It's the Chinese are going to dominate. The Russians will never go along with it because, nobody wants to be subordinated to the Chinese, so it's going to fail. When Russia sits down at the table with the Chinese today, it's not as a weak cousin. It's as a pretty damn strong partner, a partner that just beat the hell out of the collective West. Now, they did it with Chinese assistance, but the Chinese now also understand that they need Russia. They need a strong Russia in order to move forward with this BRICS enterprise. This happened because of this conflict. Everything the West thought they were trying to achieve by bringing this to fruition, because remember, this war didn't happen by accident. In 2008, William Burns, then the U.S. ambassador to Russia, wrote a memorandum called Niet Means Niet about the dangers of NATO trying to bring Ukraine in. And he, at that time, said, if we do this, it's a red line that Russia will not tolerate. It will inevitably lead to a conflict with Russia. A war will have Russia at a minimum invading Ukraine, taking control of Crimea and the Donbass. The West knew that by inviting Ukraine into NATO, that they were setting in motion events that would lead to armed conflict with Russia. This war was not an accident. It was done by design by the West to destroy Russia, and it backfired. Russia wins this war, and Russia emerges as one of the strongest, most cohesive nations in the world after this war. Russia doesn't plan on being a replacement for the United States. But what can be said for certain is once this conflict is over, Russia will never take second seat to the United States ever again.
Well, Scott, thank you for this. You gave us a history lesson, like we all needed to hear this. I don't know how Tucker felt, but I had a moment when I feel a little bit like you were talking like Putin, and I was going through the history in my mind with all those details. But when you were saying this, you know what came to my mind? This is what Russia did. They turned the pain into purpose.
It's what Russia always does. Again, there's an old saying about Russians, slow to harness, quick to ride. And so I guess the implication is that, the Russians are difficult to manage. Look, I'm friends with Russians. They'll say it straight up. I mean, even, trying to organize what we're trying to organize today, the word I always get back is it's Russia. Things are good. It's just going to, but what's happening, it's just Russia. It just takes time. Be patient. Let the Russians figure it out. They'll sort it out. And in the end, if it's meant to be, it'll happen. Slow to harness. You got to go hunt down that horse. Russia's a big country. So the horse team is all over the place. They've gone over here, there. And as you get them and get one, then a wolf shows up, scares the horse away. As you bring it in, a bear shows up, scares the other horse away. And you're bringing them in and they don't want to get in the harness. Meanwhile, the harness is broken because you haven't harnessed them in so long. So you got to take one of the horses out, chop down some trees and build the yoke. And while you're building the yoke, the other horses run away. So you get them in and then they're hungry. So you got to harvest a crop. Next thing you know, you finally get the horses together and you get the yoke on them and you hook them up to the lap, but the wheel's broken. So you repair the wheel. One horse runs away. You bring them back. But by the time you get it harnessed up, you're ready to rock. And now you're gone. And once that Russian wagon gets going, once those horses are harnessed and going, you can't stop it. It's going to where it's going to go. Ask the French. Ask the French what happened when they decided to invade Russia in 1812. I think it was the Russian army that occupied Paris in, in 1814. Ask the Germans. They made a decision to invade Russia. Slow to harness, quick to ride. It was the Russians that went into Berlin. And now we have a situation where the United States and the collective West picked a fight in Ukraine. And the Russians were slow to harness. They only went in with 180,000, 200,000 troops. Wasn't enough. Then they mobilized, but even then they were looking for a way out. They didn't want this war. They didn't want this war. Nobody wants this war. The Russians love their people. The Russians love people. I mean, that's the amazing thing. When you study the Russians, I'm an American. I'm proud to be an American, but I have to tell you, we are pretty damn callous about the people we go to war with. I have yet to meet mainstream Americans that will weep about what we did to the Iraqi people. There are people out there in the peace movement who are sorry, who weep, who view the Iraqis as humans. Very few Americans will weep about what we did to the Afghan people. We still dehumanize them, belittle them, the Taliban, the ragheads, jihadists, Muslims. They're not humans, but they are. The Afghan mother who buries her child is crying just like an American mother who buries her child. The Iraqi mothers who buried their children cry just like that. The Russians cry when they talk about Chechen mothers burying their babies. The Russians cry when they talk about Ukrainian mothers burying their babies. The Russians are an emotional people. They have a whole. It's why we call it the Russian soul. There's a reason why you call it the Russian soul, because it's real. It exists. These are not people that seek out war. They don't want war. War is never the first option for the Russians. I know the propaganda say, but the beauty of the Russians winning this war is they're going to write the damn history. And 1,000 years from now, that history is going to say the Russians did not want this war. We know the Russians didn't want this war. Putin says, I didn't want this war. What do you think Minsk was about? Minsk was about avoiding war. He could have destroyed the Ukrainian army back in 2014, 2015. But Germany and France begged him to go down a path for peace, to seek a path for peace. Today, he resents it. He says, I was naive then. Why did I do that? I could have ended it then. But he said, I chose peace. That was a mistake. But the Russians choose peace all the time. Slow to harness, quick to ride. They wanted peace. We brought them war. And war is what we got. And now the Russians are going to win this war. But the beauty of Russia winning the war is they aren't vengeful. They're not looking for global domination. They're looking for regional stability. They're looking for Russia to be allowed to be Russia and left alone in peace. And one day the Russians will unharness those horses and let them go off to being Russian horses, living in that big old country called Russia. And that yoke that they had, that yoke of war, will be put aside and it will rot. It will fall apart because the Russians don't believe in maintaining a military industrial complex that can only exist by continually perpetuating warfare around the world. That's the American system. We need war. The Russian system doesn't need war. The Russian system doesn't want war. And that's why I'm not too upset about a Russian victory. As an American, normally you'd say, I don't necessarily agree with my government here, but man, getting beat, that's not good. I don't want to get beat. If you're going to get beat by somebody, get beat by the Russians. Because the Russians at the end of the day aren't out to put their boot on your neck. They just want to live in peace. And I think that's what's going to happen here.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have time for 2 more questions?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So here you actually, from what you were saying, you made a perfect segue to both of my questions. And now here I am struggling again, which one I should ask you first. Shall we go to Gaza or shall we go to BRICS? Let's
stick with BRICS because it's related, and then we can jump to Gaza at the end.
Let's go to Gaza. I had a live stream, Scott, not a long time ago, a few days ago, and it was a round table with Larry Johnson and Pepe Escobar. And as we were going through the commentary of the current events, I said, which actually Pepe said, that the attack on Iran was in fact an attack on BRICS. And as of course, I'm not an expert, but I look at the map today and I said to myself, all right, so let's look at the countries that are at this point already part of BRICS. So as we know, it's Brazil, it's Russia, it's India, it's China, it's South Africa, and we also have Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and United Arab Emirates. So here I was thinking, so we're going to use Ukraine to turn it against Russia. We're going to use Taiwan and Philippines to turn against China. We're going to use Israel to turn against Iran. And very soon, Argentina will create absolute madness. I mean, not the country, not the people, but certain people and government. And this will be turned against the South America, especially Brazil. Am I wrong here with my thinking?
No, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that there's meetings in the National Security Council of the United States that talk about how do we stabilize the world. See, from the American perspective, the world's gone crazy. It's out of control. Why doesn't the world understand? We have the rules-based international order. It works. As long as everybody's willing to do what we tell them to do, we're happy, and you should be happy too. Because if America's happy, we're the exceptional nation. We're indispensable. You can't live without us, guys. So why are you trying to live without us? See, we get angry when the world says, well, we don't like your rules. We don't want to play your game. We're walking away. So we're left in a field, in a stadium that we built holding a ball that nobody wants to play the game with. So we need to bring them back in. And we can't do it by speaking sense because America no longer knows how to speak common sense. We gave up on diplomacy a long, long time ago. And today, I mean, the State Department is merely the public relations, extension of the Department of Defense, or the other tools of coercion that we use. The Department of Treasury. I mean, what was Blinken doing in China? He wasn't over there trying to make peace. He was saying either do it our way or we're going to financially sanction you. We threaten. And we use that all over again. That's why we have aircraft battle groups. They're not there to bring peace. They're there to scare people, to intimidate people, to say America over the shore has an aircraft carrier full of planes that could come in and bomb you into the Stone Age if you don't do what we want you to do. And then the CIA's job is literally to go in and stir up trouble, to weaken adversaries and promote us. So there's no doubt in my mind that we are working hand in glove with Mali and Argentina to create instability in the South American continent, particularly targeting, not just Brazil, although that's the biggest one. The B in BRICS is Brazil. Ecuador wants to join. We can't let that happen. So we got to bring down Ecuador. God forbid the Chileans ever decide that they want to join BRICS too. We got to bring down Chile. No, that's what we do. Colombia, We don't ever help people. Let's look at Africa. South Africa is, of course, the S in BRICS, and they're a big player. But the African continent, I think they're just about any economist worth his or her salt says that the African continent is the continent of future growth. I mean, the populations alone dictate that that's where there's going to be the greatest potential for growth. Now, Africa has been dominated in the past couple centuries by colonialism, European-driven colonialism, primarily. Now, we got rid of European colonialism, but we didn't. For instance, the French have a huge presence in Africa, and a post-colonial presence that's defined by French control of the economy. There's an African franc that the French have imposed to ensure that they are in charge of monetary policy of nearly not half, but maybe a third of Africa. Security is linked to the French military, now to the American military. Politically, the French own all the politicians, post-colonial politicians, but not anymore. They one by one, they've just decided we don't want to play that game anymore. And they're declaring independence of France. It's done, generally speaking, through a military coup, but not exclusively so. We just saw Senegal hold democratic elections, ousting the pro-French president, bringing in somebody who's more aligned with the alliance of Sahel states. That's Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. They declared independence by having coups that kicked out the French and invited in the Russians. And it's not, but see, the Russians are the security face of it. They also bring in the Chinese through the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese are in there economically, and some amazing things are happening. To give you an example, in Niger, they have oil. They have the ability to produce oil, but the French were never really keen on letting them fully develop this capability. The Chinese came in and talked about building a pipeline connecting Niger to Benin, which has a port that the oil could be exported, but the French were against it. ECOWAS threatened sanctions, the United States threatened sanctions, but Niger did it. And today, talking about exporting 110,000 barrels a day. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's nothing, but for an impoverished nation like Niger to suddenly have an infusion of, oil money, the things that they can do, they're going to start taking care of their people in a way that they never were able to when the French were in control. Mali, a lot of people don't realize that Mali was suppressed and made unstable because there's a people called the Tuareg, and I'm getting very simple here, but they're a sort of a nomadic people of the Saharan desert in the Sahel, and they know no national boundaries, meaning that the Tuareg are everywhere. A lot of Tuareg in Mali, a lot of Tuareg in Niger. Well, there are uranium mines in northern Niger that the French got their uranium from for their nuclear program. They paid pennies to the dollar of what they should have paid. Now Niger said you have to pay us full price. France didn't want to do that, but that's part of the economic revival of Niger. But the French, in order to maintain control over this area, told the Tuareg, the sort of people wanted independence, that they could go to Mali and take over a significant part of Mali, including a major city that became their de facto capital, and that could be their own independent area. And don't worry, we won't let anything happen. And they wouldn't let the Mali government recapture it. They tied the Mali government's hands. And the Mali government's going, that's our sovereign territory. You can't do that. You can't come in and dictate solutions like this. And so the French were kicked out. The Russians came in. First is Wagner. Now they call themselves the Africa Corps. One of the first things that Wagner did is recapture that city for the Mali government, allowed Mali to regain sovereign control of its territory. Now, everybody's screaming, oh, Wagner commits war crimes and atrocities. No, they don't. It's a tough fight against insurgents. But for first time, the Mali government is able to say, we control our country and we're bringing stability into our country. And now that you have a stable Niger that's bringing in money that now can bring the services to these nomadic people and make them say, hey, it's a good thing to be aligned with this government now, the level of violence is dropping. Support for jihadist groups is dissipating. The Russians and the Chinese actually have a plan that says, by promoting your independence and your economic health, you become more stable and secure, and you become better business partners for us who aren't seeking permanent war. We want permanent peace. Burkina Faso, their upstart captain of a junta leader went to St. Petersburg last year and met with Vladimir Putin. It was a pretty curious meeting because he doesn't shake hands with anybody. His whole thing is a fist bump. Vladimir Putin came out and he shook his hand, sign of respect. But he sat there, and I remember watching this. He said, "We need a nuclear reactor," and I'm like, "Good God, why would you come and tell Vladimir Putin you need a nuclear reactor? That's pretty ambitious of you." And the Vladimir said, "We'll think about it." And the Russian came back and said, "Yep, we're going to build you a nuclear reactor." Russia's going to build a nuclear reactor in Burkina Faso. Why? Well, because if you build this nuclear reactor, you now can electrify parts of Burkina Faso that electricity never touched. And when you start to electrify things, amazing things happen. Life springs forward. It's going to come to life. They're going to become independent. They're going to build a middle class. All those things we claim you need for a viable democracy, which we were denying them. We were there, America, France were there for decades, and we denied them this. We brought nothing but poverty, wars, destruction. In a 3-year span, 3 years, Russia and China have turned that entire area around. Africa is going to become the engine of BRICS. The United States can't handle that. That's a direct threat to us. But we've been sort of pushed from that area. But watch, we're going to make problems. Look at Morocco. See what we do in Morocco. We're going to cause a lot of problems with Morocco vis-a-vis Algeria, because Algeria is gravitating towards the alliance of Sahel states. Chad's going to be a next battleground because Chad has an election coming up, and they're probably going to elect a guy that's going to say, France, you take a hike, the final French bastion in the Sahel, gone. And they're looking over at the Russians and the Chinese and Mali and Niger and all. They're saying, that's what we want. Senegal could join. Benin's already leaning that direction. But the United States will, of course, have to stir up trouble. The same thing with, look at India, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. The Indians, though, aren't jumping on the BRICS bandwagon because we are keep trying to pull them away. We keep saying, no, you're part of the West. And so India is trying to straddle the fence. India needs to be careful, because if they keep playing this game too long, India is like, we're not into expanding BRICS because we think that everything will fall under Chinese control. Well, the Russians are in charge this year, India, and Russia is going to hold a BRICS summit where they're talking about expanding. And BRICS may become, instead of BRICS with an I, just BRICS, because this might tell the Indians, go. If you want to go with the West, go. But that's like buying a ticket on the Titanic, knowing it's going to hit an iceberg. But if that's what you want to do it. You'll come back. Everybody's coming back. The whole world's coming to BRICS because BRICS is the future. Go ahead.
Then the I will be for Iran.
Well, Iran's already there. They're a member. Saudi Arabia is a member, and that's what the whole attack on Iran was about. Was crying. The Israelis were behind this. The United States sort of backed out there at the last second. We were like, we don't really want this war because it's a stupid war. But the Israelis and the Indians, this is where the Indians, I don't understand them today. There was a meeting where I heard an Indian, official, intellectual say, the India Middle East economic corridor is still very much one of our top priorities, including working with Israel. I'm like, are you really that brain dead? Israel's finished. What's going on in Gaza has destroyed Israel, the credibility. There may be an indictment this week from the International Criminal Court of Netanyahu, Gallant, and the chief of staff. No nation survives this. Israel is on the way out, and yet you're saying that you want something that is predicated upon Israel normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia. That was the purpose of the attack on Iran, to create that breach, to get Saudi Arabia and Iran to start re-examining each other as enemies, as regional opponents, instead of people working together under the umbrella of BRICS to create a system of peace and harmony, economic co-prosperity. Fortunately, the Iranians and the Saudis went, hey, we're not going backwards, okay? Let's get this thing over with, and let's get to Kazan in October and talk about how we're going to turn the world into this wonderful thing that where our oil actually enriches us together. But India, they're sort of like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality. They very much want to be China. They wish they were the global powerhouse that China is, but they're not going to be, and they're never going to be. They have ambitious programs of, a $24 trillion GDP down the road, but you're not going to do that by yourself, India, and you're not going to do it with the West. The West is a giant anchor around your neck, holding you back. When America says we're here for you, India, they're not here for India. They're here to use India to bring down BRICS. That's the whole idea, to convert India into a giant poison pill to bring down BRICS. The Indians don't get it. They think that they can play both games. They're not powerful enough to do that. They don't have enough economic reach. The Indian influence on global supply chains is nowhere near what China is. And India has misconstrued what China's done. They say China is surrounding us. No, China's just doing business with the world. Why did India never think the United States was surrounding it? Because the United States has surrounded it. And the United States has hostile intent against India. Because if India doesn't do what we want, we sanction them. We've already threatened them with sanctions. Why do the Indians think we're their friends? We're not. We're just here to use you, India. And that's the reality. So this attack against Iran was definitely an attack against BRICS, and part and parcel of a grand American strategy of creating unrest around the world. But the thing is, as we speak, more and more nations are putting applications into BRICS. That's the team that the world is gravitating to. And the United States, again, is looking at an empty stadium, and nobody wants to play ball with us anymore.
So, Scott, in this, I put my hope that there will be more countries who will be pro-economic growth and peace and stability than pro-war. What you just said. In that, I put my hope.
Yeah, me too. And again, this is one of the main reasons why, I used to be, and I mean, again, I want to be again in the future. I wish I was in a situation where I never had to say Vladimir Putin's name, that I was instead saying the name of an American president, that I would say, President, Robertson, that the world should be looking to President Robertson for leadership. President Robinson has a plan. Robinson's plan is talking about creating wealth and opportunity, shared responsibility. President Robinson wants to breathe relevance in the United Nations. President Robinson don't exist and is never going to exist in the near future, because America is fundamentally broke, and all we give the world now is Biden or Trump, with an RFK Jr. down there in the middle that some people would have found attractive, except he is all for genocide in Gaza. So he's the same. He's the same as everybody. He doesn't have a sound Chinese policy. He's saying the right things about Russia, but does he really believe it? Because when you dig deep into him, you find out there's a lot of resentment towards Russia too, because at the end of the day, he's an American president. And an American president is about maintaining America's dominance of the world. American presidents can't become president if they don't believe in American dominance, because the American people are programmed only to accept a dominant America. The second you come in and start speaking common sense, saying we have to learn to live in a world as equals. Americans don't want to be the equal of anybody. We're the exceptional nation. Manifest destiny. God has made us touched us to control the world. That's why we expanded across the continent. That's why we expanded across the Pacific. That's why we continue to do our missionary work in the world today, because God has made us this way. In God we trust. We're supposed not to have a state-sponsored church, but America is a state-sponsored church in its own right. I mean, the control of Christian evangelicals, the control of Zionists that are linked to Christian evangelicals is real. And so this is why I keep using Putin's name, not because they're paying me to do it, not because I hate my country, but I love peace. I love the concept of peace. I love the notion of people not waking up going to war. And there's one leader out there, and I look at him and I go, damn it, he wants peace. He does want peace. He wants peace and co-prosperity. And all you have to do is look at what he did with Chechnya. I wish more people would study the Chechen conflict, its roots, and the solutions. Vladimir Putin sitting down with Ahmed Kadyrov and how they struggled to come up with this scheme that ended this war that was so horrible, and brought peace and prosperity. Is Chechnya perfect? There's no such thing as a perfect place. But when you look at the disparity between what Chechnya was in 2002, where the city of Grozny looked like Stalingrad, and where it is today, where the city of Grozny is a modern, vibrant place where Russians and Chechens live together in peace and harmony. I've traveled throughout Chechnya, and I've gone there, and I see nothing but people who are happy to be part of the Russian Federation, but proud of being Chechens, meaning that they never surrendered anything about who they are. They never surrendered their religion. They never surrendered their language. They never surrendered their cultural identity. That's their proud, but they're part of this broader scheme because it brings them peace and economic prosperity. And that the guy who did it, one of two, it was Vladimir Putin and Ahmed Kadyrov. Ahmed Kadyrov is dead. Unfortunately, he was assassinated by people who didn't believe in this concept of peace. He was replaced by his son, Ramzan Kadyrov, who continued his father's tradition. And this is why Chechnya is the way it is. Are the people going to sit here and poke holes in this and say this, that, and the other thing? Sure they are. But as I said about Vladimir Putin and trying to drag Russia out of the decade of the 1990s, you don't go from hell to heaven instantly. You know, there's a lot of culling of the sinners that has to take place. In Chechnya, there's still culling of the sinners that have to take place. There's still things that are happening. You know, there are still outbreaks of violence in parts of Chechnya as people continue to hold out against this vision of peace. But overall, Chechnya is a nation that works for the Chechen people. It works for the Russian people. And frankly speaking, at the end of the day, isn't that all that matters? The fact that Chechnya doesn't work for America, it doesn't work for Europe, it's not their problem. They don't care. They're not losing any sleep that the European Union is not going to be inviting them in anytime soon, or that the United States isn't going to open up a Chechen-American friendship society. The Chechens don't care. Do they want to be friends with America? Look at their treatment of me. They've treated me with nothing but respect and love. Why? Because I show them respect and love. And when you show that to the Chechen people, they respond in kind. You treat them with respect, they treat you with respect. They don't hate Americans. They don't hate America. They don't like the American government, but can you blame them? You know, because they know the truth of what the CIA was trying to do in the 1990s and the 2000s. They know what the CIA was doing in terms of bringing these outside jihadists into Chechnya, and they know the price they paid in terms of lives lost, villages, children buried. Like I said before, the Russian women today cry when they talk about Chechen mothers burying their children, and Chechen mothers cry about Russian women burying their children because it's a shared pain. They love each other. They are the same in terms of what they believe in. And the guy who made that possible is Vladimir Putin. So yeah, I'll say his name a lot. And until somebody can come up with a better name to say, I'll keep saying his name. Not because I've been bought and paid for, but because he's the only one out there with a viable plan of peace. Macron doesn't have one. You know, Rishi Sunak doesn't have one. Justin Trudeau certainly doesn't have one. Schultz in Germany doesn't have one. Biden doesn't have one. Trump doesn't have one. Kennedy doesn't have one. What name do you want me to say? All those people out there saying, stop, you're a Putin, this, that, and the other. Give me another name. Give me another program. Give me something that I can hold on to, and I'll promote that. But until you do, and it isn't out there, the only one on the global stage is Vladimir Putin. And it's not a bad plan. You know, the fact is, I don't mind promoting the Russian plan because at the end of the day, I personally believe that it doesn't result in harm to America. Because an American defeat in Ukraine doesn't bring about the end of America. It just brings about the end of irresponsible military adventurism that was solely designed to hurt Russia and the Ukrainian people and Europe and the world, but not America.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, the belt. I think both Macron and Trudeau, they have the rainbow belt.
They have the what?
Rainbow belt.
The rainbow belt. Well, as an American, I'm supposed to celebrate all color belts. So if you want to wear a rainbow belt, wear it. Don't wear it in Chechnya, though. because they don't like it. And don't wear it in Russia because they don't like it. And if you can't respect that, then don't go there. Wear it in America. We like it, apparently. So, rainbow belt away.
Okay, now I want to ask you my last question, which is quite disturbing, very serious, because we go now to Gaza. More children killed in Gaza over 6 months than in all world conflicts in 4 years. And this comes from the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. The numbers, as they say, which again, I don't know how accurate they are because it's hard to really be exact with those numbers, are exceeding 34,000. Scott, will there ever be any justice for what's taking place there?
Ever is a big word. I'm not supposed to read the chats, but I did. And somebody in there said, Scott makes a lot of assumptions. Well, welcome to the world of analysis, pal. That's what happens. People ask you questions about the future. Do you have the final history about the future written before you, where you can open up and say with absolute certainty, everything is? No, you make assumptions. You try to make informed assumptions, educated assumptions, but you make assumptions. So thank you for pointing out the fact that I am, in fact, an analyst who does what an analyst is supposed to do. You make certain assumptions. And it would be one hell of an assumption to say that these people ever get justice. Here's the big problem about getting justice. Whose justice? See, my justice is based upon values that I attribute to myself and those like me. Now, I happen to be one of these expansive people, so I view Palestinian children as part of my collective. So I believe in justice. But we have a situation where the Israelis have called the Palestinians human animals. And it's not one politician. It's not isolated. It's systemic in Zionist Israel today, where the vast majority of the people demean the Palestinians, dehumanize them. So, Scott, that's an assumption. Okay, work with me on this one, guys. If you have, let's say in the United States, I say I'm not a racist. I say I believe in equality between the races. But 5 miles away from me, in the city of Albany, on Clinton Avenue, there's an entire neighborhood full of black people, exclusively black people. And it has big problems. Now, the problems could be solved maybe with some investment, but nobody makes the investment because they're black people. They don't pay that many taxes. It's not economically beneficial for me. And if I'm a Democrat, they're blacks. They're going to vote Democrat no matter what I do. So I really don't need to put the resources in there because they're blacks. They're going to vote Democrat no matter what. And if I'm a Republican, they're not going to vote for me. So why give them resources to begin with? I'll take the resources where I need to go. And so the people of Clinton Avenue just sit there and rot year after year after year after year. Their apartment buildings are boarded up. Check out the response time of the fire department to fires in Clinton. Let it burn. Let it burn. The police, it's just black on black violence. Let them kill each other. We'll come there and clean it up, but we're not going to go in there and forcefully intervene on black violence. Why would we do that? They're blacks. So if you have a society that views that, could you say that the society is racist, inherently racist? And I think the answer is yes, but nobody wants to admit it. In America, we say we believe in equality. In Israel, all those Israelis can sit there, they believe in this, that, and the other thing. They're humanists and all that stuff. Your leaders call Palestinians human animals, and you don't do a damn thing about it. You allow settlers on the West Bank to steal the homes of people, Palestinian people. You don't do anything about it. You allow them to murder Palestinians on a regular basis. You don't do anything about it. You allow your government to use the term Amalek to justify genocide. You don't do anything about it. So the Israeli people don't believe in justice. They don't believe in justice for the Palestinian people because they don't view the Palestinian people as the same as them. There are two standards. That's why they call it an apartheid state. There's a standard for the Jews, and there's a standard for everybody else. So there's not going to be any justice coming out of Israel. Now, who's Israel's biggest backer? The United States. Now, if you look around the United States, it's sort of amazing. We're watching all these demonstrations take place on college campuses, but these are isolated pockets of a world that's not real. You see, students have time. Students can actually wake up in the morning and go, I want to get radicalized. I want to think. I want to do this, that, and the other thing. And because their parents are footing the bill, they can afford to do it too. They don't have to worry about a damn job. You know, mom and dad's paying the tuition. So I'm going to go camp on the thing. And I'm not condemning these guys. I support it. But that's not America. That's not America. Outside the college campus, there's real America. There's a whole bunch of Clinton avenues out there where black people are being put down. There's a whole bunch of, Ferguson avenues where the Hispanics are being controlled. Because America is a nation that does, we call ourselves the American stew. We're a stew of nationalities. We put everybody together. Doesn't it taste good all put together? That ain't it. The American stew is actually you put in a whole bunch of stuff and it doesn't blend. And sometimes when you dip the ladle too deep, you come and go, God, that's horrible. I don't like that. That's the reality of the American cooking pot because we haven't brought it all together the way we're supposed to. And we have a society that is silent in the face of what's going on. We're silent because of what we do to the blacks. We're silent because we do with immigrants. I mean, come on, justice. Humans are humans. I want border security like everybody else does. I want my country to be a nation of laws, and I want security. But the people that come over don't stop being humans when they come over. Okay, the mother holding the child, that child is as precious to her, whether she is a documented person or an undocumented person. It's still human life. But we have dehumanized these people. We don't care about them. Different levels of justice that we impose on people, either directly or indirectly. And on Israel, as a nation, we've remained silent. How else can Joe Biden get away with sending billions of dollars of bombs to Israel, knowing that they're going to be used to bomb the people of Gaza? Because we don't care about the people. Look, Madeleine Albright back in the 1990s, famously or infamously, when asked the question about the cost of sanctions against Iraq, and pointed out that 500,000 Iraqi children had lost their lives at that time, probably an accurate figure, later on much higher. She said, that's the price we're willing to pay. Well, we're not paying a price. The Iraqi children are. It was a throwaway statement. What it showed is that we don't view the Iraqis as humans at all. They're subhumans. They're a class of things, not humans, things that could be statistically, captured and then put away on a piece of paper to support a larger policy of American dominance. We don't view the Palestinians as people. We didn't view the Afghans as people. Do you remember the whole thing about Afghan women? We have to stay there for the Afghan women. We have to be willing to fight and die for Afghan women. We need to get the Afghan women out of the home and into the school and all this, and it's a cause worth fighting. Oh, wait, we're leaving. How many people have been talking about the Afghan women lately? How many people really care about the Afghan? We never cared about the Afghan women. They just become a symbol. We put them up there. It's a symbol. We'll throw them away. And pretty much that's the way we treat just about everybody. The Ukrainians aren't black. They're not brown. They're not Asian. They're white like us. And yet we let 500,000 of their men die. We let 10 million of their people become displaced. Millions of refugees. What's going on in terms of child trafficking and sex trafficking is we just don't talk about it. We don't talk about what's happening to these Ukrainian women. Nobody talks about it. Nobody's talking about what's happening to these Ukrainian children. Oh, we blame the Russians. Putin kidnapped them. Well, didn't 161 of these children that were kidnapped just turn up in Germany? How'd they get there? It wasn't the Russians that brought them there. It was a different system. We don't talk about that. There is no single-tiered system of justice. That's a long way of saying there will be no justice for the Palestinian people. The only justice they're going to get is when they can impose justice. And that requires an independent Palestinian state where the people in charge view the Palestinian people as humans worthy of justice. But they're not going to get the justice they want from the world. The justice they're going to get is the justice that comes from the sacrifice of those who are falling right now. And that's unfortunately how we have to start viewing what's happening here. There will never be justice for these children. No one will ever get prosecuted for their deaths. But the sacrifice that these children have made, that these women have made, that these innocent civilians have made, will be worth it if from this sacrifice comes an independent Palestinian state where there will be justice for Palestinians for the first time in a long time.
Thank you, Scott. It's very hard. The more I talk to people like you and other experts, the more I try to remain clear-minded and not go insane, seeing what's going on and how the world has been operating for so long time. It can really make you sick, you know, when you think about it. Really makes you sick.
You and I were talking before I came on, and my eyes are pretty shot.
Yeah.
It's because I do too many of these. To be honest, I spend too much time staring into a computer screen. But it's also not just the act of it's the act of talking about this. It's emotionally draining. I mean, these aren't easy topics, and there's no ready solution. And you do go insane making assumptions about what the future is going to look like because you're trying to rationalize the assumptions. You don't want to sit there and say, well, it's all over, it's going to be bad. So you have to sit there and say, well, how can I rationalize a positive outcome? And you end up confronting overwhelming evidence of humanity's inhumanity to other humans. I mean, it drives you crazy. It drives you insane. It's morally sapping. And it exhausts you. It exhausts me, I can tell you that. And I'm sure it exhausts you too. It exhausts anybody who has a conscience. But, the only good news is I think we're making a difference. I'm becoming somewhat optimistic. And the only reason why I say that is that I interface on a regular basis with an organization that's about as mainstream as it gets, meaning that they are plugged into the powers that be. And I oftentimes think that I'm going to get fired from this organization because of my approach on this, which a lot of people in that organization don't like. But in talking to some people, it was there because they said that basically, I mean, one, the person who runs it likes what I'm saying, so he's not going to fire me yet. Maybe he will today after this, who knows. But the other thing is the other people in the organization at certain levels say that my voice, and when I say my voice, I mean our voice, the collective voice of this, because my voice by itself is meaningless. My voice only counts when it's part of this alternative media approach that has allowed my voice to be heard by so many people. They said that I'm far more popular and influential than they ever imagined, and so they can't ignore me. There you go. Okay, it's the beginning of the breakthrough, where we collectively are becoming far more popular and therefore influential, that the mainstream can't ignore us anymore. And so we are getting the seat at the table, whether we know it or not, whether we want it or not. And that's the next great challenge is what happens when you do get that seat? Do you get corrupted? Do you get drawn in and say, well, I like sitting at the seat. I enjoy being at the table. I don't want to get disinvited. I'm not going to say the crazy shit that I used to say to get to the table because now I'm at the table. No. If you're batshit crazy and that's what got you to the table, then you need to stay batshit crazy. All right. You need to be the voice. You need to be the voice that can't be ignored. You can't allow yourself to be shut down. So I think you're going to see more and more people, yourself included. Don't be surprised one day when you're sitting at the table, because you are sitting at the table. Because if I'm sitting at the table, you're sitting at the table. We're all sitting at the table together. But we're all going to run into this, I think, sooner or later, where we're going to start getting invited to things and start being asked to say things that will be picked up by the mainstream media. And then the question is, do you start dumbing yourself down? Do you start playing the game? It's one of the big challenges out there. It's and all I can say is I hope that I never dumb it down. I never play the game, and I continue to do this. But I tell you what, that's a problem that I'm glad to have. That's one of those problems that you're like, okay, because it means people are listening. That means we're doing something right, Anya. That means that all this sacrifice we're making, all these long hours, all the red eyes and the sore throats,
my cold sore after my vacations, half of my face was covered.
Well, that's stress related. That's stress related.
Stress.
That's why I blur my camera once in a while, because then you can't see all the pimples on my face that break out when I get stressed. But the point is, all this that we're putting ourselves through, it's paying off. Because the last time I checked, we're not doing this because it makes us millionaires. We're doing it because we believe in it. We're doing it because we believe in the cause, and we're doing it because we wanted to make a difference. We wanted to help make a difference, and we are making a difference. What's happening today with Palestine, the attention that Palestine is getting today is not because of the mainstream media. It's because of alternative media. That alternative media has given the Palestinians a voice that they didn't have before. And a lot of the pushback that's taking place to mainstream media narratives is because of the power of alternative media. So as much as you and I get tired of it, I was telling you, man, I really want to unplug for a long time. I want to unplug, and I want to go lay down. I used to play World of Warcraft. I haven't played World of Warcraft in 6 months. I'd love to get back on and just waste hours doing that. But now I feel guilty. It's like, I guess if you went to Vegas when you had money and you didn't mind, throwing $50 here, $100 there. But when you don't have any money, suddenly Vegas, you're like, I don't go to Vegas anymore because that money's too precious. I'm not putting it on the table. Well, right now, time, I'm like, oh, Anya wants to talk to me. So no World of Warcraft today, because it's too important to speak to Anya about this. But who knows? I mean, maybe one day we'll all be able to relax because the world won't be as crazy as it is, and we won't be as under, because it's just getting crazier and crazier out there, Anya. You know that. I mean, as soon as you think one problem's fixed, 5 show up, and because it's alternative media, and because it's important, if we don't talk about it, who will? That's the question. If we don't talk about it, who will? A lot of people make assumptions. I'm buying onto that word now, right? But about why we do this, why we do that. We do it because nobody else is doing it. We do it because there's a need to do it. We're doing it because there's a void that needs to be filled. The other good news is there's more of us out there too. People are getting, we're creating this critical mass of well-regarded people. There's a tight team around us. You know them. You interact with them. Larry Johnson, Andre Martyanov, Danny Haifong, Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate. I'm sorry if I'm missing names out there, guys, but you all know who you are. We're a tight little team of people who have collectively made a difference. We're changing the way the world receives its news, and therefore we're helping change the way the world thinks about events in the world. So it's worth doing, but it's hard. It's hard.
I want to say to you, Scott, and every time I say it, and I really mean it, how grateful I am that you always find time to answer my questions. And I'm immensely grateful. And I also want to say that, if I can just add from me here, that I look at this as this is temporary life experience. And there is a higher purpose for this. For me, this is the purpose of our souls. And if our soul has chosen to do it in this lifetime, for whatever reason, to do it, you gotta listen to it, and you have to follow through, and you have to answer the call. And you're answering this call, and I feel to some extent I'm answering too. And when I was not recording my solo videos in the last few days, I was actually getting depressed because I felt like I'm not delivering something that I'm supposed to. But again, you have to rest your body, coming from me to you, to rest in order to be of service, right? So that's all I have to say. I'm very grateful, Scott, for your time. I'm very grateful for answering, especially the very important question that I asked you today about Ukraine. That gave us a great history lesson to everyone, I'm sure. Thank you guys for watching. Please support Scott's work. You have the link down below this video. It's Scott Ritter Extra. Just subscribe there and it will take you to every other link. My links as well are down below. Anything else shall we add, or that's it for today? That's it.
That's it for today.
That's it for today. Thank you guys so much. Please make sure before you go, hit this like. It's free of charge and it helps more people to see the video, to listen to what Scott had to say, and to process it, you know, to give some critical thinking to it. Thank you, everyone, and until next time.